Punishments in ancient Rome were brutal and often very arbitrary. This was especially true for people such as slaves, barbarians just integrated into the empire, and, last but not the least, women. Being a woman in Rome meant your body, your behavior, and even your breath could be policed and punished. Brutally. So how did Roman women survive it? How bad did it get? Let's uncover the punishments Rome tried to erase from history. Imagine this. You're walking down the marble-paved streets of ancient Rome. The sun is blazing off the domes of temples, merchants are yelling over piles of olives, and suddenly, a woman strolls by in a pristine, bright white toga. Heads turn, conversations stop. An old man chokes on his date-stuffed dormouse because only prostitutes wore white togas. Yes, the same flowing garment we imagine draped over noble senators and heroic gladiators was, for Roman women, a giant red flag. Well, white flag, but you get the idea. Let's back up. In Roman society, clothes didn't just keep you warm or stylish, they were wearable social labels. You didn't just get dressed in the morning, you coded yourself. Married women wore the stola, a long, layered gown that practically screamed, "I make excellent barley stew and have a dowry the size of Sicily." It was modest and flowing. In other words, anything that you would want back then, and in that weather. But if a woman was caught committing adultery, especially a matrona, a married woman of high social standing, she could be punished by being stripped of her stola and forced to wear a toga. Forever. This wasn't just a fashion downgrade, it was social exile in fabric form. The toga was a symbol of sexual availability and public disgrace. You might as well have tattooed "Do Not Trust" stamped on her forehead and handed her a Yelp review with 1 star and the word "scandalous" in all caps. And this wasn't a quiet affair. The punishment was often performed publicly in front of neighbors, family members, and possibly that judgmental fruit vendor who already thought you were suspicious. Your respectable hairpins and status was gone. Your husband was probably already drafting an announcement to all his friends about how he's moving on and focusing on personal growth. From that moment on, the woman was labeled a meretrix, a sex worker, not because she sold sex, but because Roman law had just reclassified her identity. You were no longer a wife. You were a walking warning sign. And here's the kicker. This wasn't a temporary punishment. It was permanent, with no way of getting your old life back. It wasn't just symbolic either. There were real, practical consequences. You lost your right to remarry a Roman citizen, which was a big deal when your entire financial future depended on strategic matchmaking. You were also banned from inheriting property, a devastating blow in a society where wealth was passed down like precious heirlooms and hoarded more tightly than a senator's bathhouse secrets. And let's be honest, Rome didn't do anything subtle. The streets were your courtroom, the marketplace, your jury. The city was filled with gossip sharper than Cicero's wit. You couldn't hide in a toga. It stood out like a neon sign reading, "I committed the ultimate wife faux pas." Even worse was the fact that the punishment created an ironic double standard. Men could and did sleep around with alarming frequency, and nobody forced them into humiliating outfits. In fact, male infidelity was practically baked into Roman masculinity. If you were a senator and didn't have a few mistresses, people might have started asking if you were okay. But for a woman, one misstep, one forbidden kiss under a fig tree, and suddenly you were fashionably excommunicated. And yes, there were some wild variations to this punishment. Some women, upon conviction, were subjected to public corporal punishment, even paraded through town, the toga billowing around them like a silky scarlet letter. Others were, again, legally reclassified into a lower social standing that often entailed sexual exploitation, even if they had never accepted a single denarius for their so-called crime. You might be asking, was this actually enforced? Shockingly, yes. The Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis, passed by Emperor Augustus in 18 BCE, made adultery a criminal offense. Not just scandalous, criminal, with actual trials and public shame and everything. And Augustus wasn't playing around. He even exiled his own daughter Julia for her alleged affairs. In short, if even the emperor's daughter couldn't escape toga-level punishment, nobody could. This law turned private bedroom matters into state business. Suddenly, the government wasn't just monitoring taxes and grain prices, it was also judging your sex life. It's like if the DMV started issuing tickets for bad Tinder decisions. And the toga punishment wasn't just about shame, it was about control. The Roman state wanted to keep its elite women docile, chaste, and symbolically pure, because their reputations reflected on the entire family line. If a noblewoman committed adultery, it didn't just make her look bad, it was thought to taint the bloodline. Marrying someone with a disgraced female relative was like willingly biting into a moldy olive. There was also a deep cultural fear of women's sexuality being unrestrained. A respectable woman who acted outside her assigned role didn't just break a rule, she threatened the whole system. And Rome loved its systems almost as much as it loved its aqueducts. So when you think of ancient Rome, don't just picture emperors in golden armor or gladiators doing epic slow-motion battles in the Colosseum. Picture a woman, once wealthy and proud, forced to walk the forum in a toga, not of political ambition, but of punishment. All because she dared to follow her heart, or maybe just her curiosity. And remember, a toga is just a bedsheet until society decides it's a cage. Well, public humiliation was one thing, but legal murder was another. Imagine your dad finding out you're dating someone he doesn't like and responding by legally murdering you, not grounding, not a stern, "I'm disappointed." No, in ancient Rome, if a father didn't approve of your aesthetic choices, aka your entire existence, he could, quite literally, end it. Roman fathers wielded the terrifying power of patria potestas, or fatherly authority. Think of it as a combo of dad, judge, jury, and executioner, all wrapped up in one sandal-wearing, emotionally repressed patriarch. This wasn't metaphorical. Roman law gave the paterfamilias, the oldest male in the household, absolute legal power over everyone under his roof. Sons, daughters, slaves, the family dog. But daughters? They were the most vulnerable, especially when it came to romance. Or worse, unapproved romance. If a father caught his daughter in the act of adultery, or even just suspected it, he could legally execute both her and her lover on the spot. No trial, no judge, no, "Sweetie, let's talk about this." Just straight up Roman justice, DIY edition. And this was completely acceptable, praised even, by society. Killing your daughter to defend your family's honor was basically considered good parenting. That's how seriously Romans took a woman's purity. It wasn't just a personal matter, it was a public reflection of a man's masculinity and household discipline. But wait, it gets more specific and more brutal. The law stated that if a father caught his daughter in flagrante delicto, yes, in the act, he could kill both her and her lover then and there. But he had to do it immediately, like drop the wine cup and grab the dagger immediately. If he hesitated or molded over with a goblet of Falernian, it wasn't considered righteous rage anymore. It was just premeditated murder, and even Rome drew a line there. Also, this law only applied to daughters. Sons could sleep with half of Rome and come home to a warm dinner. But daughters, one wrong look at the neighbor's son, and suddenly it's a Greek tragedy with extra blood. Now, this wasn't just about honor, it was about property. Daughters were marriage chips in the political poker game of elite Roman life. A well-behaved daughter could help the family secure land, titles, or an alliance with someone who owned a summer villa near Pompeii. But if she cheated, the alliance shattered. Because in Rome, reputation ruled, not the Senate. In some cases, a father's failure to punish his daughter could bring shame to the entire household. That's right, killing your kid was social proof that you were morally upright. There's even legal commentary from Roman jurists like Ulpian, who wrote seriously about how and when a father should enact this gruesome punishment. These weren't weird one-off cases, they were part of a fully sanctioned system. One particularly grim tale involves a father who caught his daughter sneaking off with a gladiator. Rather than issuing a "we need to talk" scroll, he exercised the legal punishment of death on her and disposed of the gladiator. And the neighbors probably applauded. Gladiators were sex symbols, but only when other people's daughters got involved. Oh, and here's a delightful twist. If the father didn't act fast enough but still wanted revenge, the job could fall to other male relatives. Uncles, brothers, cousins, they all got a turn on the family vengeance wheel. Ancient Roman women basically lived in a never-ending episode of Game of Thrones, except with more togas and fewer dragons. Her honor wasn't hers to protect, it was her father's to defend with a knife. Let's be real, this wasn't punishment. It was control by fear. A legal system designed to keep women obedient, invisible, and married off like diplomatic fruit baskets. So far, we talked about some of the most cruel forms of punishments endured by Roman women in case they were adulterers. But what about a not so universally recognized sin as divorce? If you were an elite Roman woman in the ancient worlds, a messy breakup could mean getting forcibly yeeted off the mainland and dumped on a miserable rock in the middle of the sea. That's right, divorce for women could come with a one-way ticket to island exile. No cocktails, no sunscreen, just shame, solitude, and some really unfriendly seagulls. Let's set the scene. You're a Roman noblewoman, rich, powerful, dressed in enough silk to smother a centurion. In case you found yourself in any sort of scandal, you risk this form of punishment. Next thing you know, your husband, or worse, the emperor, decided your punishment wasn't jail or a fine. No, it's a lifetime of banishment to a windswept, goat-filled island. And they weren't choosing Capri, okay? This wasn't a wellness retreat. These islands were barren, stormy, and often barely habitable. One of the worst was Pandateria, modern-day Ventotene. Sounds cute, right? Wrong. It was 1.5 square kilometers of exile-induced depression. No temples, no society, just rocks, guilt, and the occasional thunderstorm to keep things interesting. Now, exile sounds dramatic, but in Rome it was actually a standard part of the legal toolkit. While men were typically exiled for political crimes or falling out with the emperor, women were sent away for a different reason entirely: moral failure. That meant cheating, gossiping too loudly, or being a little too clever for your own good. Let's take one of the most famous examples, Julia the Elder, daughter of Emperor Augustus. Oh, Julia, smart, funny, and the absolute queen of sarcasm. Unfortunately for her, she also had the audacity to host wild parties and, gasp, maybe flirt with men who weren't her husband. In Rome, that was enough to be labeled a public disgrace. So what did Daddy Dearest do? He exiled her to Pandateria, stripped her of all luxuries, banned wine, and even forbade men from visiting the island. She wasn't the only one. Agrippina the Elder, the wife of Germanicus, and a major political threat to Emperor Tiberius, got the same treatment. But she wasn't even exiled for sex scandals, just for being too popular and having opinions. Apparently, that was even more dangerous. It is perhaps difficult to imagine how exile worked in practice. Well, you're given a few belongings: no servants, no jewelry, no letters of recommendation, and escorted by a grumpy guard to the nearest port. Once you arrived on the island, you were monitored constantly. Think prison, but with worse weather and no structured meal plan. Also, you were often officially divorced at the same time. Yep, the moment you landed on that cursed rock, your husband could legally cut ties and remarry someone more obedient. So not only were you socially disgraced, but you were now single, broke, and living with goats. Even more fun, well, for Romans at least, in many cases, women weren't told how long the exile would last. Could be a year, could be 20, could be forever. Basically, your fate depended on who was in power and how long your scandal stayed hot in the Roman rumor mill. And let's not forget the ultimate twist. Your exile could be upgraded to execution at any time. If Rome got bored, or if your enemies whispered the right things in the emperor's ear, someone could show up with a sword instead of a ferry ticket. Now, not every exile was permanent. Some women, like Julia the Younger, were eventually allowed back to Rome after years of isolation, but returning home didn't erase the shame. You were still that woman, the one who got kicked out of Rome like a naughty child from a birthday party, only you were 35 and used to running a villa with 300 staff. And this wasn't a punishment for criminal behavior in the modern sense. No murder, no treason. In most cases, these women were being punished simply for challenging patriarchal control by being too loud, too independent, too politically active, or just a little too entertaining at dinner. In fact, the brilliance and cruelty of exile was how clean it was. No blood, no public beheadings, just remove the woman from the map and let time and distance do the rest. It was like hitting mute on a political problem, except the mute button was a volcanic island with no plumbing. Today, we might joke about wanting to escape to an island when life gets hard. But in ancient Rome, island exile wasn't a break. It was erasure. You weren't just cut off from society. You were erased from memory, from politics, from public life. It was like being ghosted by an entire empire. We have left one of the worst and certainly the most humiliating punishment for last. Just like almost everything we mentioned above, in ancient Rome, a woman's hair wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a public virtue rating. And if you misbehaved, snip, snip. Say goodbye to those artfully arranged curls and hello to the ancient Roman version of a walk of shame, the humiliating buzz cut punishment. To Roman society, hair wasn't just decorative, it was ideological armor. Long, well-kept hair meant you were modest, loyal, dignified, and most importantly, under control. It said, I'm a good Roman wife. I make sacrifices to the household gods. I don't drink wine, and I definitely haven't been eyeing the neighbor's gladiator. But if you stepped out of line, if you were accused, not even proven, of adultery, misbehavior, or just a general lack of submissiveness, that hair became the first thing to go. Oh, and the whole thing was in public, under the glaring Roman sun, with shears. We're not talking about a tidy little trim either. This wasn't a cute bob or a rebellious pixie cut. This was full-on shearing, like livestock, a clean shave down to the scalp, performed in front of judges, elders, priests, or sometimes just your neighbors gleefully clutching amphorae of wine and moral superiority. For Roman men, this act was the ultimate symbolic takedown. Cutting a woman's hair stripped her, quite literally, of her honor, status, and identity. In a culture obsessed with appearances, a bald head screamed one thing: disgrace. Now let's talk about the drama of Roman hairstyles. These weren't just buns and braids. Upper-class Roman women had architectural hairdos. We're talking about intricate curls, towering beehives held together with gold pins, and enough hair oil to lubricate a chariot. Wealthy matrons had an entire enslaved staff called ornatrices, whose job was to curl, braid, twist, and apply powdered lead. Yes, lead, to keep things bright and fabulous. So when that hair was shaved off, it was a social assassination. And let's be clear, this wasn't just an aesthetic blow. In Rome, a woman's hair was part of her persona. Portraits, funerary statues, coins, all showed women with elaborate hairstyles that identified them by class, virtue, and family honor. Losing your hair was like losing your passport, Instagram followers, and wedding ring all in one fell swoop. And it wasn't just the elite who faced this punishment. Enslaved women and prostitutes could also be shaved bald, especially if they tried to pass as respectable matrons. Rome had a strict know your role, wear the right hairstyle policy. And if you blurred those lines, snip. In fact, Roman law had a sneaky little clause. If a man caught his wife cheating, he could legally drag her to court, accuse her, and personally shave her head as part of her public disgrace. Imagine the scene. A furious husband, a stunned wife, an audience of spectators, and one very smug pair of rusty shears. Divorce Roman style, folks, just add humiliation and a crowd. There was even a priestess punishment clause. If a Vestal virgin, the high priestess's sworn to 30 years of chastity, broke her vow, she didn't just get buried alive. Yes, that happened too. Before her execution, her hair would be cut off ceremonially to mark the loss of her purity. Nothing like a fresh shave to say, you've offended the gods. Now, this all might sound extreme, but here's the twisted brilliance behind it. Shaving a woman's head required no blood, no bruises, no broken bones. And yet, It shattered her socially. It was punishment without a sword, just scissors and shame. It also served a visual purpose. A shaved woman became a living billboard of dishonor. Every time she walked past, people whispered, kids pointed, men averted their eyes, or didn't, depending on the mood. She couldn't hide what had happened. Her body became the message. Don't be like her. Fast forward to today, and yes, women still face ridiculous policing over hair. Cut it too short, and someone asks if you're going through something. Dye it bright pink, and suddenly you're unemployable. Ancient Rome just went harder and with sharper tools.